Can you beat Fire Emblem 8 without taking damage? Well, no, you can't. Seth gets hit in a scripted battle in the opening cutscene before you even get control of your characters. But if we skip that cutscene and quietly ignore Seth's missing health, then yes, we can tackle the rest of the game without ever taking a single point of damage. Let's lay down some ground rules. First off, if a unit under my control receives any damage, I have to restart the current chapter from the beginning. Allied NPCs getting hit doesn't count, they don't belong to my army. And secondly, no RNG manipulation. I will not use emulator save states or otherwise rig the dice to be in my favor. Whatever happens, happens, and it's on me to find a strategy with a high chance of success. And for the last rule, I will not do any extra battles. Typically you can grind infinite money and experience through battles on the overworld, inside arenas, or in the Tower of Valni, and I am banning those. I'm just going to play the game's main campaign and I'm going to take whatever experience and resources they give me on the way. In the game's prologue, we get Seth, whose excellent starting stats are balanced out by his weaknesses, which are as follows. Nothing. We also get Erica, who isn't very good. We're immediately going to rely on the single most important method of preventing damage in this run, evasion. Seth totals up a 37% chance to avoid between his high base speed and luck stats, and we can tack on 15% more by playing the rock paper scissors game known as the weapon triangle. Since Seth is going up against axe fighters, he can equip a sword to take down their already shaky hit rates down to the mid-20s, which is actually pretty good, but I'm still gonna get hit sometimes. We can improve our odds by hiding Seth in the trees, which adds a further 20% avoid versus the boss, easily clearing the prologue on my first try without any problems. Chapter 1. This soldier randomly doesn't move to attack even when you enter his range, which is fantastic because enemies with lances are going to be a really big problem for Seth this run. I mean, first of all, they have a weapon triangle advantage while I'm using swords, which really puts a damper on the evasion plan while I'm cleaning up the enemy axe fighters at the same time. Even if I swapped Seth over to lances, I really don't want to flip a coin to dodge every single time I need to kill some dude whose stats are so low they're represented in single-digit binary. So all I need to do is kill them before they can hit back. Seth's 14 might silver lance is so overpowered for this point of the game, he may as well have brought a nuke to a knife fight. I can one-shot the only soldier that threatens me, and the remaining spearmen have such low strength that their pool noodle spears will just bounce off of my armor. Defense tanking is going to be the most convenient way not to take damage in this run, because I don't need to rely on the lucky dodge, but it's only going to work reliably in the early game as the damage of mid to late game enemies are easily going to exceed the defense stat of even a well-leveled Seth. And the real problem is that none of these strategies are going to work against the boss. I can't kill him in one hit with the Silver Lance. He deals too much damage for Seth to take the hit, and dodging him is a coin flip at best. I would happily toss javelins at the boss from outside his striking range, but you can't even buy them until after Chapter 2. And that's why sometimes you just have to roll the dice. So I redid the chapter from the beginning. It's around now I realize I'll occasionally need a non-Seth-based solution to problems, but honestly nothing the game's given me so far is really much help. We did get 2 new units this chapter. Franz is kind of like a tiny Seth, but training up an initially weak unit is awkward and frustrating if they're not allowed to get hit. It's even worse for Gilliam, who would have potential to become a defense tank if not for his single-digit defense and evasion at low levels. So let's make some advantages for Seth and put the odds in my favor so I don't need to redo chapters all the damn time. Let's talk about support conversations. You can make certain units befriend each other by having them hold hands on the battlefield for a certain number of turns, eventually unlocking a conversation that lets them, pause in the middle of the battlefield to have a little picnic and talk about friendship. When within 3 tiles of your new buddy, you'll get passive stat bonuses based on your color-coded personality traits, which is more or less if your daily horoscope determined that Geminis deal extra damage when Mercury is in retrograde, which as far as I know is accurate to real life. Both Franz and Erica are viable partners for Seth, so I could buy them lunch and just mash end turn 37 times in a row to gain a deeply underwhelming 5% bonus to my avoid, but the game limits how many friends you're allowed to have, letting you engage in small talk exactly 5 times ever before your boss tells you to go back to work. This is a problem because Franz and Erica have the light affinity, which is otherwise very good, but lacks the only thing I'm actually looking for, which is evasion. Since I'm gonna hold out for a better support partner, I'm gonna have to beat this chapter with just a lucky coin flip and nothing else. We get a couple of new units at the start of Chapter 2. Mulder is a healer, which is questionably useful in a run where I'm not allowed to get hurt. Vanessa, however, has some real potential. Her speed is fantastic, and her support affinity is Anima, which not only gives the stats I want the most, but she has access to 2 Anima affinity partners in the early game, which lets you stack up a pretty absurd bonus of 5 damage, 5 defense, and 25% evasion. And despite all of these advantages, I decided not to train her. So, Vanessa rides a flying pony into battle, which allows her to ignore the movement penalties of harsh terrain, but it also locks her out of the benefits of defensive terrain tiles, which prevents me from hiding in the trees or hunkering down in a fort for extra evasion. Also, training her all the way from level 1 is kind of tricky. She can toss javelins to get experience while staying out of striking range, but they're really heavy and her overall frail constitution dooms her to lose a whopping 6 points of speed for attempting to use a weapon heavier than a cardboard tube. Also, the majority of the enemies kinda still wield axes at this point of the game, putting her at a constant weapon disadvantage because she can only use lances. Seth, mind you, can use javelins without a speed penalty, because he's good at everything. So I just beat the chapter by having Seth kill everything. Again, I don't really have a choice for now because doing anything else is risky until I get access to more ranged weapons, and I don't want to commit to any new long-term investments for funneling my experience into until I find the right unit for the job. It might look like I'm taking a lot of tiny risks over and over again to have Seth take out the axe fighters at melee range, however, it's actually more likely for me to dodge than you might think. The game's lying about the accuracy numbers. The game secretly weights accuracy towards the expected outcome. A 90% chance you expect to hit will almost never fail, and an enemy's 1/4 chance of hitting you is actually much less likely than the stated chance. The system was dubbed True Hit by the community, and it makes the player feel better by fudging the numbers to align with their expectations for what they think the result should be. For a no-hit challenge, this is an absolute godsend and makes stacking evasion progressively better the closer the enemy's hit rate approaches 0. Now, as long as you save his son from the bandits, Garcia will join your army automatically at the end of the chapter. By letting him remain an allied NPC for the entire duration of the chapter, it's not against the rules for him to take damage. While Garcia won't be good enough to use for combat due to his terrible speed, he is the support partner for Seth that we've been waiting for, since his fire affinity gives an avoid bonus. We'll have him follow around Seth for the rest of the game, like a supportive dad attending his son's baseball game. Chapter 3 gives us Nami, a unit so far down on every tier list you're gonna have to bring a shovel to dig her out from the bottom. But it's precisely here in this abyss of perceived weaknesses that I unearthed my crown jewel, a rough, uncut gemstone of a unit that I plan to polish into a brilliant diamond. I'm not joking, by the way. I fully believe that Nami is not just strong, but maybe even optimal for a no-hit playthrough. Let's get the crippling weaknesses out of the way first. There's a reason this character does not garner any respect. She's roughly as durable as wet tissue paper, and she's restricted to only using bows until we change her class. Archery isn't very good because it can only strike at range, letting enemies simply waltz in and dogpile you for free up close. This is kind of insulting when compared to other ranged weapons like javelins, hand axes, and magic tomes that can strike both up close and at range. It severely hampers the ability of an archer to strike back during the enemy turn where a lot of the action takes place. She also joins at a low level with low stats, like most of the bad units in this game, requiring a lot of dedicated training to bring her to a point where she can reliably kill in a single round of combat. So what use do I have for a weak unit that can't fight back? Nami's strength lies in her speed and luck stats. While her starting stats are modest, her growth potential is excellent, meaning we can scale her evasion sky high if we can get her enough experience. Having high speed and luck certainly isn't exclusive to Nami, but Nami's support affinity grants evasion, and every single point of avoid matters if we want to consistently dodge every hit versus a dozen or so enemies. Since Nami uses a bow, it'll be fairly easy to get her past the early levels since she can strike at enemies from range without getting hit in return. Bows are neutral and can never really gain weapon advantage, but that also means the enemy can never get a weapon advantage on her while she's using one, which will really help with consistency when dealing with mixed enemy formations later in the game. Nami also happens to support with Garcia, who I imagine is currently struggling to grill enough burgers to feed everyone because I'm making him the entire army's shared father figure. We can only get 2 boosts out of him because the rest of his support conversations will go to Seth, but I'll pick up another buddy for Nami in Chapter 4. In what might be a controversial moment, I'm going to get Nami a couple early levels by having her repeatedly shoot the boss. He regenerates a little health during his turn, making him last longer as a pincushion for archery practice. This kind of thing is often referred to as boss abuse, a form of experience grinding where you use the boss's natural HP restoration to get infinite experience out of a single enemy. In this case, I'd argue that I'm not quite doing that. Nami is trying to kill the boss as fast as she can, she's just really bad at it. Part of the justification for doing this is that this is a completely safe way to kill the boss, since I don't risk getting hit as long as I drag Nami away to safety before the boss can equip his ranged weapon on enemy phase. Once Nami's bow has nearly snapped in twain from overuse, I let Seth finish off the boss and continue onward, ending the first and last time in the run I'll need to kill a boss slowly. Chapter 4. We're still in the easy early game chapters, but the large number of aggressive enemies that charge your position make it pretty hard to get kills with Nami, who's still kind of weak by this point. Playing slowly to maximize her number of kills got me totally overrun, so I have to restart and take a more aggressive move by planting Seth on a forest with a javelin, and relying on some dodges to help him thin the horde. You recruit a pair of mages over the course of this chapter. We're gonna make Artur follow Nami around all game like a lost puppy to grant support bonuses, totaling up to 25% bonus evasion if both him and Garcia are within 3 tiles. I slam through the chapter and feed my kills to Nami where possible, but her refusal to gain strength leaves me with little confidence in my long-term plans going forward since she still isn't self-sufficient at all. Chapter 5 is a comedy of blunders and bad luck. The chapter has multiple side objectives. We want to rush forward fast enough to save the villagers from brigands that spawn in from the sides. Plus, we need to push our new healer into the enemy line to recruit a dangerous enemy to our side whose power and accuracy are far too high for us to safely engage up close. While healers are pretty useless in this run, Natasha is actually one of your good support partners for Seth if you want to grab 10% more Void, but I'm still holding out for someone else. By ignoring the left flank and carefully advancing up the right, I'm able to recruit my new unit and cut off the reinforcements before they run off and start burning down houses. My new swordfighter Joshua has fantastic speed, but he's pretty terrible for this challenge because he can't equip any ranged weapons. His luck stat isn't great, and his support affinity doesn't give evasion. With the chapter nearly complete, I send Vanessa to go shopping and accidentally leave her in range of his stationary enemy archer on the left flank I had been ignoring, making me redo the entire chapter from the beginning. Thankfully I'm able to redo everything on the first try, but Nami still isn't gaining strength. Regardless, with a tricky chapter finally down, I move forward with renewed enthusiasm to tackle the rest of the game. Chapter 5X nearly made me quit. So our perspective swaps to the other main character, Ephraim, and his brilliant plan to take on like 30 dudes by himself. We get a temporary Seth replacement whose terrible luck gives him crappy avoid, 2 filler horsemen with mediocre stats, and Ephraim himself. Ephraim has very good stats when trained, but he's limited to a single weapon type on a map that's almost entirely open terrain, so training him here isn't happening. We need to ration out the uses of our only javelin, making it kind of unreasonable for him to safely engage anything that he can't one-shot with the overpowered special spear. This chapter is a nightmare. While the beginning is simple because we can hide Orson behind a pillar, this is the first and last time we can utilize defensive terrain on this chapter, which means Orson doesn't have enough defense to handle lances and he can't reliably dodge axes. On top of that, the enemy positioning in this chapter makes it kind of difficult to handle just one enemy without entering the attacking range of several more. To make things worse, I can't farm support bonuses onto Orson since he's a temporary unit who's banned from making friends. I could grind 7 extra points of avoid onto Ephraim, but he still isn't that good because his weapon type only matches up well versus very accurate swords, and he would need to evade both lances and axes, which is a total crapshoot at best. To add even more fun, this is when the randomized enemy stats becomes an issue. Non-boss enemies might have slightly higher or lower stats every single time you restart a chapter, which can result in axe fighters too durable for Orson to one-shot with his silver sword, and enemy mages too durable to go down to a single toss of a javelin, risking a fairly accurate counterattack. By relying on hit-and-run tactics, I use my other horses to pull Orson back to safety once he kills something with the javelin, but his accuracy is so bad that it's not always going to work. Also, I need to carefully manage my only javelin as it's the only way to safely attack the boss, and it's gonna break after 20 throws, which is alarmingly few uses since it typically takes around 2 throws to kill an enemy and we have around 30 enemies standing around. Without a reliable way to handle the gauntlet of enemies near the boss, I'm forced to restart over and over while taking extra time to reset for better stat rolls on the enemies. Eventually, the game relents and lets me kill the boss, finally freeing me from my purgatory. Chapter 6 is blanketed in a thick fog that limits our vision, while also requiring us to complete the chapter relatively quickly for an important item we'll need to promote Nami. You can greatly extend your range of vision by giving thieves a lit torch and using them as scouts, which I immediately do incorrectly. Thankfully, the majority of the enemies are clustered in the center of the map, and you can skim your way across the top to bypass most of them. I get jump scared a couple times by fast-moving cavalry jumping out of the fog, but I save myself by sneaking Seth to the boss and stacking a void with both supports and defensive terrain, ending the chapter early with tons of enemies still alive. Chapter 7 is painfully easy, but it's a great opportunity to feed Nami an insane amount of experience before the game's difficulty spikes in the next chapter. Enemies will start equipping powerful steel weapons, and we really need a safer alternative to Seth's kind of borderline defense stat. The gentle trickle of enemies combined with ample defensive terrain makes the chapter fairly trivial, and by the end we're finally able to showcase Nami's power as she brings the enemy's hit chance down to 0. While steel weapons of high power were relying on their poor accuracy to let us handle them safely, she also finally reaches double-digit strength thanks to a stat-boosting ring we looted this chapter, so she's now killing enemies in a single round of combat. Chapter 8 is where Nami finally starts to carry the run, using her incredible evasion to brazenly avoid dangerous steel weapons on open terrain. Most of the time. Nami's low defense helps bait in enemies to try and kill her, enabling me to charge west and rescue Ephraim's squadron from charging horsemen coming in from behind. I used just about all my units to take out the enemy formation in one clean sweep. Even Garcia gets to chip in and deal the final blow. The remainder of the chapter involves slowly baiting in enemies one at a time for Nami to slaughter for experience, causing her level to skyrocket. By the time she's helped Seth finish off the boss, her evasion stat has shot up into triple digits when she's on defensive terrain inside of support range. Since we managed to max out her level this chapter, we can go ahead and promote her with the Orion's Bolt the game gifted us for completing chapter 6 quickly. The reason her health appears damaged here is that her max HP went up several times from how many levels she gained this chapter. The Ranger class is an enormous upgrade for Nami, increasing her mobility, giving her access to a close range weapon and swords, and pumping up her stats so she can use weapons that aren't made out of styrofoam with less of a speed penalty. I now need to choose whether to follow Erica or Ephraim's story, and I'm going to stick with Erica mostly because I have absolutely no clue if it's possible to do Phantom Ship without taking any damage. Chapter 9 is a bit challenging due to the high number of aggressive enemies charging my position and the lack of any convenient choke points, forcing me to carefully fall back as I thin out the horde. It's a bit too risky to play this chapter quickly, so I miss out on a couple of side objectives and a recruitable character, but I'll get another chance to nab her in chapter 13 so I can clean out her pockets for useful items and stick her permanently on the bench with everyone else. Once I break through the initial rush of enemies, I make the galaxy brain decision to purchase an unlock staff from the shop in order to train a unit's staff rank without needing to rely on healing staves. And then I kind of forgot that I did this for the rest of the playthrough. I easily clean up the remaining enemies, mistakenly assuming that the game must be pretty easy now that Nami has gotten so strong. Chapter 10 proves to be incredibly annoying. Nami doesn't have good enough defense to deal with the weak, accurate swords, and Seth hasn't gotten particularly good defense level ups and is starting to struggle even against weak enemies. On top of that, I need to quickly advance south amidst hordes of bad guys to rescue a squad of allied NPCs and prevent the enemy from manning a ballista that really cuts off my movement options. I need to carefully position my units outside of ballista range while taking risks to aggressively push south, which is pretty tricky when trying to maintain the 3-tile range for support bonuses. While Nami's evasion is much more reliable than Seth's, her inability to strike both up close and at far at the same time really hampers her ability to quickly clean up a pack of enemies that strike at mixed range, which Seth can handle simultaneously with a javelin. I find myself restarting over and over as I take small risks to defeat enemies that completely fail to pay off, and I start making outright mistakes such as forgetting to count tiles. Something is gonna need to change. I notice the archer on the left flank's AI flag is configured weirdly, and he won't move to attack unless you stand directly in his crosshairs, letting me sneak a flyer past and drop Erica behind enemy lines to recruit some new fighters into my army. This includes a couple of combat-ready units, but more importantly, a dancer that can use her action to refresh my spent units and grant them an additional turn. This gives me enough momentum to prevent the enemy from taking the Southern Ballista, establishing a foothold where I can clear out the remaining aggressive enemies before reinforcements start flying in. One of the many units we get this chapter is Marissa, who, despite having an in-universe reputation for martial prowess, is basically identical to Joshua back from chapter 5, except she's worse and isn't even very good at using swords. I mean, even level grinding won't give her good stats unless you get lucky. As soon as I think I'm in the clear, a heavy wave of mobile reinforcements arrives from several angles. In order to protect my vulnerable troops, I have my units scoop each other up in their arms, like bridal carry style, and huddle in the central fort for a giant group hug. Despite having a seemingly open ceiling, the walls of this fort are impenetrable to flyers, granting me a convenient choke point to deal with the first wave of enemies before the cavalry arrives. The horsemen have high stats, so I draw them in and swarm them with my entire army like a pack of hungry piranhas to take them all out in one fell swoop. We've reached the home stretch. I still need to clean up the few remaining stragglers and break through the fortifications the boss is hiding behind, which mostly consists of running them out of siege ammunition by taking defensive terrain and taunting them with my wacky avoid stat. After such a long ordeal, I decide the boss is a little too accurate for comfort, so I use up some precious shots of my longbow to strike from outside his range and finally end the trickiest chapter so far. I thought Chapter 11 would be hard on account of the poor vision on top of the allied NPCs to go rescue at the bottom of the map, but the torch staff reveals the entire screen for you, and the enemies this chapter were made wrong at the factory in order to make this guy look really strong, despite having like 9 speed. Nami's level is getting kind of high, and the enemies are at best like level 10, so I start training Artur this chapter so I can gain some actual experience when I kill an enemy. Since he's following Nami around to grant support bonuses anyway, it's fairly valuable if I make him a strong fighter in his own right. Promoted bishops get bonus damage versus monsters, which would be good to have right now, but it'll be good again later when 3 of the 4 last chapters in the game have monsters in them. I had a minor heart attack when a huge wave of monsters did sort of a tactical SWAT team breach through a door, which I resolved by having Nami 360 no-scope the most powerful enemy, and then using Seth as a traffic cone by removing his weapons and sticking him in the door, leaving the enemies alive in order to cause a traffic jam where the more powerful gargoyle in the back can't get close enough to hit Seth and deal damage. The NPCs aren't even remotely threatened by the time I finally arrive, and I swiftly recruit the new healer directly onto the bench. Dosla isn't very good since some of his stats appear to be missing, but he can stand on mountains, which might be kind of cool in the next 2 chapters. Chapter 12 is when the game starts making fun of you for not using flying units, making all of the loser infantry walk single file through a winding mountain trail while Pegasus Knights can do this. The game gives us Sala, a magic user with good stats and weapon ranks, who are going to train up in order to use the warp staff once I've decided I'm tired of actually playing the chapters and I want to skip directly to the boss. All the monsters are fairly low level and there's no real timed objective, so I decide to train the living heck out of Artur since Nami doesn't gain much experience on kill and she's already like really strong by this point. There's a few annoying waves of reinforcements. The main difficulty of this chapter comes from dealing with squads of flying gargoyles I need to safely lure out, which isn't too difficult because they don't have very good accuracy, and I made sure to thoroughly lubricate Nami with a fresh coat of butter. I got Artur a bunch of levels, and he's starting to look pretty promising. His offenses are getting high enough to the point where he can kill enemies by himself, and he can safely fight any magic unit with a res boost from like a Pure Water or a Barrier Staff. His avoid still sucks because his luck stat is like 4. Chapter 13 is full of challenges. The objective of the chapter is to survive for 11 turns while fending off omnidirectional reinforcements and 3 enemy ballistas sniping me from long range. Adding more fuel to the fire, I need Erica on the front line to recruit 2 playable units from the enemy's side, one of which is holding a valuable item and the other who is legitimately worth training. The boss is sheltered by a dense formation of troops located behind choke points created by the mountainous terrain. I decide the safest course of action is to take out the lower ballista and have my vulnerable units retreat southwest outside of the enemy's firing range and away from the bulk of their troops. I use Nami to eliminate the upfront threats as they arrive, but I quickly find myself getting surrounded by enemy reinforcements on all sides. I have Erica grab the first recruitable character, but doing so places her inside of ballista range. I have my units drag each other to safety, perfectly threading the needle between the range of the ballista and the threat of the Wyvern's javelin from the southwest. However, I'm still in trouble. Picking up Erica to save her from the ballista prevents her from recruiting the other playable character on the next turn, unless I can get her back on her feet now. I could have Nami take Erica and drop her off where Garcia is currently standing, but I can't move him further northwest without getting cut to bits by a crazy accurate mercenary. I decide to bank on defensive terrain and support bonuses to have Garcia win a lucky dodge versus the very inaccurate ballista shots, which pays off when the AI chooses not to even bother targeting him. We're still alive, and the center ballista is out of ammunition. Erica recruits Cormag, a flying unit with reasonable power out of the gate who gains excellent stats when trained up. If you recall way back in Chapter 5, I passed on using Natasha as a secondary support partner for Seth since I've been waiting for Cormag the entire time. A powerful flyer is a great asset to have with the difficult terrain of many late game chapters, and using support synergy to stack up avoid bonuses is all that keeps this army afloat. With my side objectives complete and piles of reinforcements charging in, I unleash my secret weapon, running away and hiding. The southwest mountains are covered by a 2-tile choke point of forest tiles. By placing Seth and Nami on defensive terrain, I can use my flyers to scoop up my remaining troops and hide out in the mountains, safe from the hordes of approaching horsemen and the incoming army from the west, allowing me to quietly pass the turns until the chapter ends on turn 11. Or so I thought. One of the reinforcements has siege magic. I desperately try to squeeze my units outside of his range, which not only gets me hit by a stray javelin, but to my absolute horror, I discover that our boy Pablo not only brought long-range magic, but he can run with it, threatening an absolutely nightmarish 16 tiles around his current position. As things are, it seems completely hopeless to avoid taking any damage if I'm even remotely close to the west side of the map. But there is another way out. To the east, if I can take out the chapter boss, I can win prematurely without needing to wait out the clock. I switch my strategy from defense to total offense. If I can quickly eliminate all threats, I won't get overwhelmed by sheer numbers when the waves of reinforcements roll in. This is easier said than done. I'll need to aggressively use my entire army without taking damage, instead of relying on God's favorite princess to handle single enemies at a time while everyone else cheers her on from the sidelines. I break my units into teams and eliminate the ballista encampments on turn 1, trusting in defensive terrain and the whims of the random number generator to keep me alive. There are several obstacles that make it difficult to push forward. Getting someone in range to kill the central ballista puts them in range of the dangerous enemy sleep staff, and enemy horsemen are going to start pouring out of the eastern forts in huge numbers starting on turn 5. Nami lures out the hugely dangerous enemy rangers using her enormous stats to eliminate the most powerful enemies in a single round. The enemy horsemen are huge in number and their mixed weaponry is highly inconvenient for Nami. However, with a defense boost from the enemy's own forts, Seth can handle them all at once. Once I safely secure Cormag, I make a huge play to ferry Seth from one side of the map to the other. This chapter has been the absolute pinnacle of what it means to do a no-damage run, forcing me to use strong tactics, positioning, and aggressive play to flawlessly handle hordes of enemies boasting high mobility and long-range weaponry. It's time to trust in the power of the units I've spent all playthrough training for moments like this. Seth eliminates a tall pile of enemies by himself, holding my ground and giving me an opportunity to close in on the boss. The chapter will end instantly if I can defeat the enemy commander, but his enormous health and defense makes this pretty difficult and I can't attack him at range without a risk of retaliation. I have Dazla hand-deliver Seth a secret weapon and approach the boss, combining Seth's gargantuan 20 strength, a horse-killing lance, and a modest support bonus in order to deal exactly enough damage to take down the boss and free me from the most intense chapter of the run. While the previous chapter was quite fun, Chapter 14 is a long, boring labyrinth of narrow hallways and closed doors where the only timed objective can be handled on the same turn you breach the building. My goal is to train Cormag, who reads some training manuals to improve his accuracy by 8%, which accomplishes absolutely nothing. On my next attempt, I swap him over to a Slim Lance, losing out on 4 power for an extremely marginal gain of 5% accuracy. My other goal this chapter is to train Sala's staff rank by using a Men's Staff every single time Cormag gains a hit point on level up, which is almost always. I'm also going to get good use out of the Barrier Staff. I can have Artur bait out mages with his boosted resistance and then chip their health down so Cormag can lightly bonk them on the head of his cardboard tube. Hilariously, Artur is somehow too powerful, and I need to have him carry one of his allies on his back to lower his stats enough so he doesn't obliterate the enemy mage on the counterattack. This chapter is boring even when you play it normally, but breaching all of the rooms one by one to carefully draw out and feed experience to a weak unit is a fresh kind of hell that takes me literally over 100 turns. However, this is very effective at pumping experience into unpromoted units, so Cormag's strength is skyrocketing, and while he'll never really be able to stack up truly high avoid, I want to use him as sort of an attack helicopter who can carry my other units around, grant support bonuses to Seth, and throw javelins of the force of Zeus. After a long meandering journey, I slaughter around 40 enemies, mostly one at a time, getting both Cormag and Artur to a high level, and I promote both of them for substantial gains. Cormag gains like 10 bajillion speed, and Artur can now obliterate monsters, which I'm hoping makes a difference when I get to Chapter 18. Sala nearly finishes getting his staff rank trained up to A by spamming the Barrier Staff all chapter, and I sneak off to the secret shop to spend some of my seemingly infinite money on more barriers, as well as some high critical rate weapons for later. Chapter 15 is an expansive map about reuniting Ephraim and Erica, which I'm theorizing is considerably easier to do on Erica's route without getting hit, as Erica's initial position is threatened by accurate swordsmen and flying reinforcements, which would be extremely difficult to deal with safely if I didn't have my entire army start up north. I will need to rescue Ephraim within a half dozen turns or so, as substantial reinforcement waves will start flooding in from the south, but there's a fair bit of wiggle room. My strategy is to clear out the weak enemies in the upper left corner of the map, giving me a safe location to reunite with Ephraim while I handle the waves of reinforcements from all sides. My first attempt falls flat as I fail to deal with a strong mercenary while trying to smuggle Ephraim up north, so on my next attempt I commit almost my entire army to the west in order to completely clear out the enemy forces, using Cormag's superior mobility to fly over the restrictive sand and annihilate the offending swordsman from the last attempt. Flying units and for some reason magic users can glide over sand dunes without taking a movement penalty, making them invaluable during this chapter. Ephraim's little squad does include a couple new units, but I have very little use for them. Null is usually pretty good for utility, as he can promote into a summoner that can conjure distractions to take hits for you, which sounds extremely good for this kind of run, but using summons counts as taking damage since the summons are units under your control, unlike NPCs. The other unit is a fairly high defense Great Knight, which sounds good, but the high number of promoted enemies from here on out makes it much harder to stack enough defense to totally ignore the incoming damage. This map is also known for its buried treasure, including the one and only Warp Staff, which is going to be an enormous help later on. Thief-type units have a 100% chance to dig up buried treasure, so I use a flying unit to carry them around the entire map like a billionaire's private jet. Once the various waves of reinforcements are handled, I do my usual trick of drawing in enemies one at a time to swing uselessly at Nami, carefully advancing inch by inch until Nami utterly obliterates the boss. Chapter 16 is a bit annoying, but we do get a powerful late-game unit whose weapon, while limited in use, grants her enormous stat bonuses such as a whopping extra 15 points of defense. She only ever gets the one Dragonstone to use, and I'm going to need to burn through about half of it to train her up, but her high experience gain and enormous growth potential will quickly turn her into a nearly immortal super weapon I can use to take out key threats or tank powerful hits without taking damage. The tricky part of the chapter involves maneuvering around enemy siege magic while tiptoeing around the invisible line that makes every man, woman, and child in a 10,000 foot radius become aggressive and charge your position. My first strategy involves clearing out the Southern Room in order to retreat and handle the next wave of enemies safely, which completely backfires when I forget to count tiles and get hit by a stray lightning bolt. My second attempt involves setting up a careful breach of the Southern Room before alerting the Horde to my position, making space to handle the incoming pile of high-strength warriors of Nami while I use the incoming cavalry as fodder for training up Mur. With all threats disabled, I carefully run the enemy out of siege ammunition by having Nami dodge thunderbolts over and over, which fails as I take a roughly 3% accuracy hit to the face on the final bolt, because I forgot to move Nami's support partners within range. Surely I won't make any more mistakes on my next attempt. That would be really, really embarrassing. I repeat my winning strategy a third time, realizing just how easy it is to take the Southern Room if I remove the Swordsmaster ahead of time with a longbow from across the eastern wall. As I train up Mur, I would like to point out that her defenses add up to a staggering 35 defense and 32 resistance at this point when you factor in the bonuses her weapon grants. She has gained so much max HP that she appears to be heavily damaged, but she started the chapter with a hilariously small max HP of 15 and then gained 1 to 2 more every single level. The boss is so easy that I forgot to turn my combat animations back on to record a clip, something that will happen multiple times in the final stretch of chapters. For story reasons, the game finally lets us promote the main characters, which makes my completely unused Erica look even more pathetic somehow. Chapter 17 is incredibly dangerous, featuring powerful, aggressive enemies on all sides, packed up by a heavy stream of reinforcements that threaten to overwhelm the center island underneath a heavy pile of enemy flyers and druids, putting the player under a lot of pressure to save all of the NPCs. However, since you can end the chapter at any time by killing the boss, I just warp Nami directly to his front door and ring the doorbell. I get some extremely powerful weapons for free, as well as the reward for saving all of the NPCs. Chapter 18 was unexpectedly fun and challenging. The gimmick of the chapter is to move quickly, breaking monster eggs before they can hatch. Any chapter that forces me to move fast is always going to be more interesting than something I can turtle, and it really matters this time around, as hatched Gorgons can move immediately, have incredibly high damage output, and some of them come with a 10 range Shadow Shot spell, which is horrifying to deal with on a mobile enemy. I need all hands on deck to prevent the situation from quickly cascading into a death spiral. However, it's quite difficult to move my units forward as quickly as I need to, since patrolling Shadow Shot Gorgons can blast through units even with high resistance, and I'm horrified to learn that not even Mur's dragon form can sponge a hit without taking some chip damage. In order to deal with the dense cluster of eggs up north, I decided to burn more precious uses of the Warp Staff, something I wanted to carefully ration, and it didn't occur to me that you could just repair a damaged warp with the hammer and staff until after I finished the entire playthrough. To my credit, I think it made the final stretch of chapters a lot more interesting this way. Cormag's power and mobility really shines during this chapter. The terrain is highly restrictive to grounded units since the bright orange tiles will burn you for 10 damage at the start of your turn. Normally just an annoyance for the average player, but a death sentence in this run. I split up my army using Artur's high resistance and effective damage versus monsters to make aggressive plays deep into the map, and I bring Mur to the lower corner to solo a bunch of eggs and reinforcements. Upon which I learned that flying units are not immune to getting burned, and that training Cormag to prepare for this chapter was a complete scam. I make very similar plays on my next attempt, but I'm more wary of getting burned this time. All jokes aside, Cormag does show off by one-shotting a powerful enemy with the S-rank lance, and his mobility makes him pretty good at bypassing the cliffs and taking care of some out-of-the-way eggs. Splitting up my army 4 ways to break all of the eggs meant that every unit had time to shine, making every investment over the course of the entire campaign feel like it was meaningful. This chapter was the most satisfying map to plan for and execute in the entire run, as the map values mobility and having multiple strong units as opposed to my typical strategy of standing completely still while Nami kills everything for me. Chapter 19 features overwhelmingly numerous reinforcements that swarm in from all angles using mixed, accurate, high-damage weapons and magic, all while restricting your vision and also forcing you to protect the king from harm. There's a couple strategies that would work here. One involves grabbing the king and hiding in the treasure room behind a one-tile choke point, but it's both easier and quicker to rush to the left, illuminate the corner the boss is hiding in, before he gets surrounded by literally 24 strong enemies, and warp directly to him with your best unit to end the chapter prematurely. Chapter 20 thought the reinforcements idea from the previous chapter sounded really fun and will happily throw over 100 additional monsters for you to fight over like 30 turns or so. I am not doing that, but I am down to 1 use remaining on my ethically sourced warp staff, and I need to transport Erica to the center island to actually end the chapter. My first idea is to clear out the initial horde with Myrrh as fast as possible before the reinforcements show up, which instantly fails because enemies can carry poison lances, and those will deal chip damage no matter how much defense you have. Even if I could have gotten Myrrh safely to the center, the waves of Moguls form an extremely annoying barrier as they fly around attacking from range. My strategy is to have Nami clear out the initial rush of enemies between me and the boss while the rest of my troops fight off reinforcements from the north. I use a flying taxi to get Nami onto the central island, and I rescue them back by using the rescue staff. The boss is extremely powerful and accurate, so I start chipping him down from outside of his range with my precious longbow. A number of enemies charge to block my path, but I bring in my flyers to back her up. I do end up getting completely surrounded, but I can blast a hole through the enemy lines of Myrrh, chip the boss down for the last few remaining shots of my longbow, and weave Cormag through the gap to deal the finishing blow. With many of my resources either broken or on their last dregs, I burn the final use of my warp staff to teleport Erica to the island and complete the chapter by the skin of my teeth. Heading into the final chapter, I need to defeat two very tough, powerful, and accurate end bosses. Myrrh is down to the last 5 uses of her Dragonstone, and she's not even very useful for me here because the most powerful enemies either ignore defense or deal so much damage that she can't take the blow. My real super weapon is the one I've been cultivating since chapter 3. My beloved Nami hits the level cap, maxing out her speed stat. Tack on an additional 5 points of luck from the S-rank bow and she reaches a hilarious 117% avoid stat, without any bonuses from terrain. Outside of the final boss, this map is actually quite simple as long as you don't take the central staircase and trigger never-ending waves of skeleton reinforcements. I sneak my army up the right flank, taking on enemies one at a time and exhausting the Shadowshot Gorgons so I can get close to the boss. After positioning my emotional support squadron, I have Nami punch through most of his health bar for crit, letting Cormag swoop in for the kill. There's just one more baddie left between me and the end credits. I position my units to rush the Demon King who summons monsters that get in my way. Artur blasts a hole for me while positioning himself inside the support range. I need to kill the boss on this turn as the Demon King has the damage to obliterate anyone in my army, and his melee weapon has 35% more accuracy than his currently equipped ranged weapon. Nami slams in 52 points of damage and I refresh her action to go again. Let's finish this. Through the power of grinding supports, carefully training my units, and crawling forward one tile at a time, I have completed the entire game in a ripping fast 832 turns. So, off the script, this video took me a long time to make. This was a big project for me, so can I just say the YouTuber thing of like, comment, subscribe, send this video to all your friends and family, mail me $5 in a wax-sealed envelope, and really, can you just give me a little kiss on the forehead and tuck me in the bed at night? I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.